We have, in the past, I think that the press generally, I think, been a little bit too sympathetic uh, of Mossop, and to the point that we always sometimes hide their irresponsible acts. Gentlemen, I want to ask you now, these distinguished citizens that have been killed, I mean, what on earth can justify such people who have served this state in different capacities, being beaten to death and burnt as civilly as some common criminals as has happened to them? To this end, I have directed all the villages there that took part must be rounded up. Most of leadership that was part of this game must be arrested, and the security forces are out doing just that.
A number of features made these attacks particularly shocking and horrific. Firstly, the age of the attackers and the age of the victims. The murderers were youths, and those they killed were supposedly their revered elders and leaders. In most Nigerian communities, it is considered sacrilege to argue publicly with one's elders, let alone strike them. Secondly, the attack took place at the residence of an Ogoni traditional leader, a symbol of traditional authority in Ogoni society. The youths murdered elders and leaders in their community in public, at the premises of a traditional leader and close to a shrine considered spiritually sacred. This triple desecration demonstrated the extent to which authority and respect had broken down among Ogoni youth, and how older leaders had lost control to what had essentially become a youth rebellion. One Ogoni remarked, "The whole of Ogoni land was there. More than 1,000 men were there when this man was arrested and executed by this youth. How come nobody raised a finger in his defense? Yet he was a chief, a prime minister of Ogoni land, hacked to death in front of his kinsmen. This sad history will continue to be told, and our great-grandchildren will hear of it. They will hear of it." The 4 murder victims were influential, wealthy, and well-connected. All of them were also founder members of Mossop. Given their prominence, the government would not let the murders go unavenged. Security forces arrested Saro, Wiwa, Miti, and Kiobel the next morning and accused them of inciting the mob to murder the victims. Kiobel's arrest was strange, since the meeting at which the murders occurred had been called in his honor. He did not have an obvious motive to kill men who had organized a reception to pay him respects. An additional irony was that the 2 of the victims, the Orage brothers, were brothers-in-law of Saro Wiwa, while the other 2, Bade and Kobani, had been his close friends. Samuel Orage's wife Elizabeth was the older sister of Saro Wiwa's first wife, Maria. Theophilus Orage was the older brother of Saro Wiwa's father-in-law. The murders sent shockwaves through Ogoni land. The victims' family were traumatized. Mohammed Kobani, for one, was angry that press coverage of the mayhem focused on the arrest of Saro Wiwa and not the fact that 4 people had been murdered. He said, "Is it not ridiculous that the press ignored the murder of prominent sons of Ogoni? Instead, it is Ken that is making the headline." On Sunday, May 23, 1994, Lieutenant Colonel Como addressed a filmed press conference. Como was well connected in the military. Like the GOC of the Lagos Garrison Command, Brigadier General Isha Bami, Como was from the military minority but military significant Zulu ethnic group in the northeast. At the press conference, Como had with him a bag containing the charred bones and remains of the victims. He invited the journalists to inspect the bag's contents. Although no one had been charged with the murders and the investigation and trial had not commenced, Como already felt he knew who was responsible. He said, "Ogoni is bleeding, and not because of federal troops, but by the irresponsible and reckless thuggery of Mossop elements, which must be stopped immediately." He appealed to the press not to allow themselves to be used as propaganda tools by a dictator like Ken Saro Wiwa. Como promised that whoever is involved, no matter how highly placed in the society, would be appropriately dealt with according to the laws of Nigeria. The federal government convened a civil disturbances special tribunal to try the suspects. The defendants could not appeal to a civil court against its verdict, and the only provisional ruling council could confirm or commute its sentences. On November 21, 1994, The Chief Justice of the Federation, Mohammed Bello, swore in the 3 members of the tribunal. All the members had considerable legal experience. Its chairman, Justice Ibrahim Nadi Auta, was a federal high court judge in Lagos and a former Attorney General of Borno State. The other tribunal members were Justice Etowa Enyong Ariku, a high court judge and a former Attorney General of Cross River State, and Lieutenant Colonel Hamid Ibrahim Ali, a serving military officer from the Corps of Military Police who had bachelor's and master's degree in criminology. Despite being detained for 9 months, the accused were not brought before the tribunal until February 6, 1995 at the Rivers State House of Assembly Complex. Armed soldiers were positioned inside at both ends of the courtroom, behind and facing the tribunal members. Family members and supporters of both the defendants and the deceased were also in attendance, along with observers from the Nigerian Bar Association, human rights organizations, and international legal observers. Philip Umiadi led the prosecution team. He was the lawyer for the notorious Association for a Better Nigeria, whose court antics in 1993 led to the annulment of June 12, 1993 presidential election. Gani Fahimi led the defense legal team, assisted by several other lawyers, including Femi Falana, Fatai Osho, and Emmanuel Ukala. Ledon Miti defended himself since he was a lawyer. The lawyer Bayo Fagbuda watched the proceedings on behalf of Shell.
Car recovered into the Bo police station, which the 4 prominent Ogoni leaders were burnt in this Volkswagen Beetle car.
The thrust of the prosecution's case was that Saro Wiwa had incited the mob to murder the victims, whom he blamed for colluding with the government to prevent him from attending a rally. There were 15 defendants. Saro Wiwa, Miti, and Kiobel were charged with counseling and procuring Kupien, Bera, and others to murder the victims. 2 prosecution witnesses, Charles S. Danwi and Nayon Akbar, swore statements in June 1994 alleging that Saro Wiwa told his supporters to deal with the vultures. However, Danwi and Akbar later retracted their statements and claimed that they had been bribed to give false evidence against Saro Wiwa. 11 other defendants were accused of being among the murderers that killed the Ogoni 4. The defense argued that the police officer who escorted Saro Wiwa away from the rally had made no mention of his blaming the murder victims for his fate, and that even if Saro Wiwa did, this did not amount to incitement to kill. On several occasions, prosecution witnesses made statements that were contradictory to those previously given to the police. When the defense lawyers sought to tender their previous statements, the tribunal refused to admit them. Witnesses Nayon Akbar and Charles S. Danwi claimed they had been given inducements of money and government employments to give false evidence against Saro Wiwa and Mossop. They also alleged that they had been coached on what to say at the trial and that 7 other witnesses had also been similarly bribed. The defendants and their lawyers also had to deal with harassment by the security forces. Orunto Douglas, an environmental lawyer in Saro Wiwa's legal team, alleged that on June 26, 1994, the lawyer Uche Onyechagu and Nicholas Ashton Jones, a British representative of the environmental group of Pro Natura, went to see the defendants, Ledon Miti. Lieutenant Colonel Okutimo arrived while they were meeting and flew into a rage, drawing his pistol and berating the security men for allowing the visitors to see Miti. He kicked the police officer and ordered him to be detained in the cell. Okutimo also ordered Douglas, Ashton Jones, and Onyechuka to be flogged before driving them away in a jeep. Mohammed Kobani was a key prosecution witness since he was present when the victims were murdered and was a brother of one of the victims. He also appeared at the May 23rd press conference at which Kumo alleged that Mossop was responsible for the murders.
I think at this point, I will call one of the survivors there to tell you exactly what happened, because he was there at the beginning till when he probably escaped and until when the first troops that moved in yesterday rescued them and brought some of those that were now treated. Thank you.
I'm a native of Bodo. Myself and my elder brother, Chief Ian Kubani, in company of Chief F.S. Pai, left Bodo yesterday, Saturday, the 21st of this month, around the hour of 9:30, to attend a meeting at Gyoko, our traditional headquarters, to discuss how we are going to make arrangements to welcome, to receive our newly appointed commissioner and the chairman of the caretaker committee, chairman of our local government council. We drove straight to Gyoko, but meanwhile, as we were going, we saw some military personnel and mobile along Paul, where we have the police station. We called our Paul police station to inquire the presence of those people in these military men around. The officer in charge of the station told us that he's not aware of their mission there, that he didn't ask them, and they didn't give him any answer. So we have to proceed to Joko, where the meeting is going to be held. As we got there, the meeting took up at about 11 o'clock. The first to address the meeting was Chief Ian Kubani. Then next was Chief A.T. Bade. Chief A.T. Bade had not finished his own speech when a young man on a motorcycle came in on a top speed to inform us that Mr. Ken Saro Wiwa was on his way coming to address a rally in Gokana, and he was stopped at Popier Junction by some military officials and was asked to go to Port Harcourt. And that while he was going to Port Harcourt, he told them, because this boy is a member of NICOP, Ken Saro Wiwa's personal army, was a member of that army, and that when he was going, again, I told them that those who are responsible for his not coming into Gokana to address the rally are now meeting in Gyoko, so they should come to Gyoko and deal with those people. As soon as he finished the message, he left. In not less than 3 minutes, we saw about 200 human beings flock into Gyoko. They rounded the Bremenes Palace, where the meeting was being held, and started beating all of us up. But before the arrival of these people, the commissioner, whom we were making some arrangement for his to receive him, came, and viewed the environment there and left without a word. So these people, when they came and they started beating all of us, we appealed to them that they should tell us what is wrong. They refused. They didn't tell us anything. Only that we prevented Ken from entering Gokana to address the rally. We said, no, that we are here for a different purpose, and we can't be part to such an arrangement. Now, the first person to be killed, I am an eyewitness, I saw it happen. The first person to be killed and the body dragged away from that palace was Mr. A.T. Bade, the former SMG to the state government. The second was Chief S.N. Urage, a former commissioner of this state. I saw this happen. Then the third, which I saw, I was beating, this one happened on my feet, was Chief Ian Kubani. They killed him on my feet. And when I could not hold it again, I had to run for my dear life and took refuge in the Brisako shrine behind the Bremenes Palace. The whole of that palace had been razed to the ground. 3 cars were burnt, one belonging to Chief S.N. Ulagi, the other one belonging to Mr. A.T. Bade, and the other one belonging to Chief Obi Nalero. We took refuge in that shrine until the Bremenes Gokana came to our refuge. As we are in that shrine, the commissioner again, Dr. Barnem Jobe, came back a second time. And as I was hiding in that shrine, I saw him addressing NICOP group. And after addressing them, there was a shout, hey, twice, like that. Then he left. Then they advanced towards where we were hiding because they've seen us in that shrine. But they were afraid to take us out of that shrine to kill. Then they brought in the Biremene Bukana to pour libation to exonerate them for whatever crime they are going to commit in that shrine so that they can deal with us and kill us. The Biremene refused that he is the owner of the whole, all of them are his children. And there's no reason why he should give out some for killing, because these people have not done anything. He forced him until we were there, the Biremene tried to pet them. We were there for over 2 hours, until say around 5 o'clock, our savior came. The army, the military personnel came in and started shooting. People ran away, all of them ran away. And it was these soldiers that rescued us from that shrine. Then we were two who took refuge in that shrine. It was myself and Chief F. Pai, Chief Francis F. Pai. Then these soldiers came and took us from that shrine to a vehicle where we were conveyed to Port Harcourt for treatment. That's my story.
The defense sought to demonstrate inconsistencies between Kobani's accounts given at the May 23rd press conference and his written witness statement. When defense lawyers sought to present a video recording of the press conference, the tribunal refused to allow the defense to submit its own copy of the videotape. For its part, the Rivers State government claimed it could not produce a copy of the tape as it had either been erased or did not exist. Despite the claim, footage of the press conference had been broadcast by Channel 4 on UK national television. This was the last straw that broke the camel's back. On June 22nd, the defense lawyer, with Saro Wiwa's blessing, walked out in protest at the tribunal's biased conduct. They felt that their participation was giving legitimacy to a sham trial. From that moment on, Saro Wiwa ceased to cooperate with the tribunal, ignored his proceedings, and busied himself reading newspapers and periodicals. Saro Wiwa's mocking wit and humor did not endear himself to the tribunal. When Justice Alta probed Saro Wiwa on medical reports concerning his alleged psychiatric problems, Saro Wiwa responded that he must be suffering mentally as he saw kangaroos every time he looked up at the judges. He detached himself from the proceeding and often had the demeanor of a bystander rather than the defendant in a trial where his life was at stake. He refused to cooperate with the replacement lawyers appointed for him by the tribunal. When the prosecution called witnesses, they testified without being cross-examined since there was no functioning defense team. On October 31st, 1995, the tribunal found Saro Wiwa and 8 other defendants guilty and sentenced them to death by hanging. Saro Wiwa said he had been convicted before the trial even began and told the tribunal, "There is no possibility whatsoever that either I or Mossop could have planned any such action, and I will forever vow to it, no matter what any forum decides upon." Although there was no right of appeal from the tribunal's verdict, the sentences were subject to confirmation by the Provisional Ruling Council. Although Saro Wiwa's brother Letam was a captain in the army, the convicted man's fate was bleak. Sentenced to death with no right of appeal to civil courts, they could only be saved by the military regime against which they had campaigned. The timing of the death sentences was potentially explosive. The verdict coincided with the Commonwealth Head of Government meeting in Auckland, New Zealand, and Nigeria's human rights record had already antagonized the other member states. The Commonwealth leaders pressed Nigeria to commute the death sentences, as did the US and EU. One notable figure who refused to join the public clamor for clemency was South African President Nelson Mandela. He was criticized for not being more vocal in pressuring Abacha. The death sentences also embarrassed the Commonwealth Secretary General Emeka Anyoku, who was a Nigerian. Unbeknown to the public, both Mandela and Anyoku privately telephoned Abacha to appeal for clemency. Mandela's experience of negotiating with hardline regimes had taught him that public hectoring was unlikely to bring about change, and he had faith that his charm and backdoor mediation with Abacha would save the lives of the convicted men. When pressed by reporters on live television, Mandela refused to criticize Abacha directly. Saro Wiwa's son Ken Jr. appeared on British television to raise international awareness of his father's impending fate. The wives of Kilbel and Bunyan also sent appeals for clemency to Abacha. On November 9th, Kilbel's wife Esther said, "People's minds are already shaking, but mine is not. No matter how hard your heart is, God can touch it. They are not going to kill these men." At 11:30 a.m. on November 10, 1995, a black police van arrived at Bori camp and took the convicted men to the Port Harcourt prison. They were simply told that they were being transferred. They had their legs chained and marched in single file into the prison records office. Their countenances suddenly changed when they saw a priest waiting for them inside the office. A prison official read out the death sentence to each man individually. They were taken to a cell block C, which was the holding area for convicts on death row. Some of the men remained stoic while others wept or screamed their innocence. Each man was placed in a separate holding cell, and they were taken out one by one to the gallows that had been erected inside a hut to the side of the prison court. Each man was placed in a separate holding cell, and they were taken one by one to the gallows that had been erected inside a hut to the side of the prison courtyard. There have been conflicting accounts of Saro Wiwa's execution and last words. However, all of the accounts agree that his execution was botched. After the guards put a hood over his head and a noose around his neck, things did not go according to plan. When the executioner activated the trapdoor, the hanging mechanism would not work, and the trapdoor did not open. The guards removed Saro Wiwa from the hut, rechecked the mechanism, and tried a second time. Although the trapdoor opened, the mechanism malfunctioned a second time, and the gallows did not drop Saro Wiwa down far enough. A doctor who took his pulse confirmed that he was still alive. The guards picked Saro Wiwa up and hanged him for a third time until he died. The 8 other convicts were hanged after Saro Wiwa. After the executions, the corpses were removed from the federal prison in Port Harcourt, loaded onto trucks covered by tarpaulins, and driven under heavily armed guards to the Port Harcourt cemetery on Agri Road, less than a kilometer away from the prison, and close to Saro Wiwa's office at 24 Agri Road. The fate of those convicted for the 1995 coup influenced the fate of the Ogoni Nine. The international community's lukewarm response to Abacha's clemency earlier in the year did not give Abacha any incentive to show further clemency. From Abacha's perspective, he had done what no other Nigerian ruler had ever done: spared the lives of convicted coup plotters. Rather than commending him and granting him diplomatic esteem for his unprecedented acts of magnanimity, the international community instead continued to berate him, pressed for the men to be released, refused to ease their diplomatic pressure, and criticized everything he did. Abacha later complained to a senior US State Department official, "I had to bend down to the ground and commute sentences after intervention by President Clinton, John Major, Jimmy Carter, and Bill Clinton all called. John Major called twice, but it was Clinton I wanted to please. I had to bend down. I got no appreciation." The Provisional Ruling Council had met 2 days before the executions to discuss the sentences. Sparing the death sentence in the case of the coup plotters had drained the PRC's residual goodwill towards the international community. The PRC could not afford to look weak by commuting death sentences twice in 1 year. A memorandum summarizing the PRC meeting noted that the government's decision on the 1995 coup plotters had sent wrong signals to the generality of Nigerians, and that the current case should be used to correct that wrong impression. Abacha said that no sympathy should be shown to the condemned men, and executing them would be a lesson for everybody. The Ogoni Nine were executed on the very day that the Commonwealth Head of Government's meeting started. The decision to execute them in defiance of an international appeal for clemency was deliberately timed to send a message to the Commonwealth and other international leaders that Nigeria was impervious to outside pressure. But the Nigerian government badly misread the mood of the international community. International leaders were outraged. The defiant manner and timing of the executions was like a contemptuous slap in the face, especially of respected leaders like Mandela, who had appealed for clemency. Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe said that he and other African leaders had tried to assist Nigeria as friends and brothers, but apparently they were inexorably set on a path of self-destruction. British Prime Minister John Major referred to the executions as judicial murder. He recalled his country's High Commissioner to Nigeria, Thorold Masfield, and suspended all military relations with Nigeria. Britain also blamed the sale of military equipment to Nigeria and extended its already existing visa ban on Nigerian government officials to include their family members. The US, South Africa, Russia, and other European countries recalled their ambassadors from Nigeria. Nigeria was now an international pariah. Mandela had felt personally betrayed as he had put at risk his considerable reputation by not publicly criticizing Nigeria after the verdict in the hope of preserving goodwill and influence with the country. He said, "I have tried persuasive diplomacy to get Nigeria on track, but with the latest developments, there's nothing I can do other than call for Nigeria's suspension from Commonwealth." At Mandela's behest, the Commonwealth suspended Nigeria from the organization. One question remained. A very large mob killed the Ogoni Four. The riotous nature of the murderers probably involves scores or hundreds of potential murderers. Even if some of the murderers were apprehended, the vast majority of them escaped justice and are still at large. The agent provocateur who arguably did the most to incite the crowd's violence, Timothy Ntu, by alleging that the vultures were meeting to share money, was not among the defendants, even though several witnesses identified him by name and physical appearance. Given the absence or death of the principal witnesses, we will never know whether Saro Wiwa incited the murderers. No forensic evidence linked any of the defendants to the crime scene, and none of them confessed. Much of the evidence against them consisted of oral testimony by their enemies and rivals. Although we cannot establish with certainty what Saro Wiwa said, the fact that youth acted so rapidly and violently to something they thought he said was a sure indication of the influence that he had on them. If Saro Wiwa was not legally culpable for the murders, one may still ask whether he and other NYCUP members bear moral responsibility for creating an intense atmosphere of denunciation in which anyone who urged caution or dialogue with government authorities was vilified as a traitor. Mossop's rhetoric of resource control and restitution resonated with other communities in the oil-producing areas and acted as a motivation for the formation of other protests in the Niger Delta. The intra-Ogoni wars led to the neighboring Ijaw ethnic group's displacement of the Ogoni as the vanguard of those advocating control of resource in the Niger Delta. The murders and execution robbed Ogonis of their leadership. After the murders, Como said, "The Ogoni are killing each other. It is going to take Ogoni land almost forever to produce the quality of people they have lost."
On the 9th of November 1995 at about 10 p.m., the State Controller of Prisons and myself were summoned before the then Administrator of Rivers State, Lieutenant Colonel Dauda Como. He handed over an execution order and a list of 9 Ogonis, confirming their execution and ordered that the exercise must be concluded the next day. With the execution order, the date and time fixed, the necessary machinery for execution was put in place. 10th November 1995. Between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. on 10th of November 1995, the whole prison and environs had been taken over by soldiers and mobile policemen. Traffic, both vehicular and pedestrian, on all adjoining streets stopped, and there was utter silence everywhere. Some prison officials who were not within the prison were tied hands and feet and put in a store and locked. The 9 Ogonis who were earlier condemned by Ogoni Civil Disturbances Tribunal on the 31st of October 1995 were 1. Ken Bisun Saro Wiwa, 2. Dr. B.N. Kubel, 3. Dr. Quinem, number 4. Baribo Bera, number 5. Saturday Dobi, number 6. Nodu Rau, 7. Felix Mwate, 8. Paul Levura, and 9. David Oboku. Contrary to public opinion, only numbers 5 to 9 persons were interned in the Port Harcourt prison. Ken Saro Wiwa and 3 others were never in my prison and were only brought on the morning of 10th November 1995 for execution. I do not know where they were kept. At about 11:25 a.m., the 4 condemned convicts in our prison were brought in a black Maria amidst heavy armed escort. Mobile policemen, regular police, as well as the army, under the command of a major, provided security. The 9 condemned convicts were then handed over to the sheriff alive. Prison officials present were now mere witnesses. The execution proper commenced exactly at 12 p.m. By 1:30 p.m., the whole exercise had been concluded.
How were they executed? You said you were there.
The warrant said hanging. They were hanged. In my statement, I said that the people were hanged.
Okay. After the hanging, what happened? You were there.
After the hanging, the next thing is burial.
Now, I suggest to you that after the hanging, they wanted, these soldiers that took over the prisons, wanted to make sure that those people were dead, and they poured acid on them, their corpses.
It's not correct.
It's not correct.
Yes.
What happened?
After the hanging, the doctors certified them dead. There is a coroner's report. I said earlier, if you want the details, you apply to the Minister of Internal Affairs and you have them.
Okay.
The coroner's report is there. All the reports are there. They were now put in various caskets.
Yes.
Various caskets, and then taken to the Port Harcourt cemetery and buried.
Okay. Now,
so I don't know where the acid was poured on them, according to you.
Oh, okay. So you are sure that the acid wasn't poured within the prison premises?
I don't know anything about acid.
Okay.
I said that they were put in various caskets, 9.
Yes.
And sealed and carried in a lorry and taken to the cemetery. That is all.
Good. Now, immediately the corpses left the prison, you don't know what happened to them, do you?
Well, I can say so.
You can say. Now, do you know that acid was poured on those corpses before they were buried?
I cannot say so.
Good.
Reliefs being sought. 1. The petitioner wants the commission to find as a fact that the torture, trial and execution of the Ogoni 9 amounted to wrongful killing by the federal government of Nigeria and a gross violation of the human rights of the Ogoni 9, having been done in breach of due process, fair hearing, and the minimum requirements of justice. The petitioner claims that in view of the wrongful killing of the Ogoni 9, which has been traced to politically motivated state policy to eliminate leaders of a vocal minority so as to send a lesson to those other minorities standing in the way of elite exploitation of their resources, in conjunction with the oil companies, the Ogoni 9 must be recommended for state pardon, just like other sufferers of politically motivated victimization, such as Colonel Chukwu Emeka Ojukwu, were pardoned. The petitioner claims that all those responsible for the unlawful killing of the Ogoni 9, particularly all members of the PRC who participated in the confirmation, should be recommended for some form of discipline or held accountable in one way or the other, such as personally bearing a portion of any compensation awarded to the Ogoni 9. The petitioner claims that this commission should recommend that never again must we have a law which provides for a hybrid process of sending sentences to a body of illiterates for confirmation, such as the so-called PRC, other than appeal to a regular court of law, particularly in cases where capital punishment can be imposed. In fact, any law that does not allow appeal process through regular courts must be declared unconstitutional and below a minimum of civilized conduct. The petitioner claims the sum of 10 billion naira only against the estate of General Sani Abacha, all members of the PRC, Colonel Dauda Akomo, former military administrator of Rivers State, Colonel Paul Okontimo, former chairman of the Rivers State Internal Security Task Force, and the government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as compensation on behalf of the family and dependents of the deceased persons. Details of the family dependents are attached, my lord.